Hey now peeps, you know, one of my favorite games of last year was Sushi Go from Adventureland Games. It's a very quirky, charming game about drafting cards with little anthropomorphic sushis on it in order to make sets and score points based on variable different things depending on what sushi card it was. Now, a lot of people agreed with my sentiment that it was a great game, enough that Games is going to be publishing a new version of it, which should be out right about this time, actually. Games is known for doing kid-friendly, family-friendly games and putting them in tins, much to some people's chagrin. But this is not the only game about drafting sushi cards that Gamewright has in their stable for the year. Later on this year, they will be reprinting a new version of a game that I happen to have that we're going to take a look at today called Sushi Draft, which is a name that cuts right to the point, actually. This is, again, it's all about drafting cards with pictures of sushi on it in order to score points. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of the publisher at the moment, but I will have it on the placard before my overview. But what makes this different than Sushi Go is the fact that how you score points with those cards that you draft is drastically different. And also, as you can tell, the appearance is quite different than Sushi Go. So whether or not this game is for you, well, that remains to be seen. Let's go ahead and do a brief overview of the game, and we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Okay, let's go over the Japanese version of Sushi Draft. This will be released later this year from Gamewright Games with an official North American release, so I think they're keeping most everything sort of the same with the circular cards and the chips and stuff like that, but the artwork will probably be different and some of the rules might change slightly, so keep that in mind if you get that version instead of this one. This one can be kind of hard to track down, but you can find American rules for it on Board Game Geek. I believe that's where I got mine from. Now, this is a competitive game for 3 to 5 players, and it is a card drafting game. Like I said, these are actually the circular cards you're going to be using throughout the game. All these chips out here correspond to these cards because each of these cards also has pictures of sushi, but these are the point chips. These are what you're trying to get in order to win the game. The game is played over the course of 3 rounds. Whoever has the most points, not just chips, but the points on the other sides of these chips, which are randomized, whoever has the most of those chips and those points is going to be the winner. So at the start of the game, each player is going to be dealt out 6 of these sushi cards, and once every player has those cards, you are going to draft. If you're not familiar with card drafting, what it essentially means is that you're going to look at the hand of cards that you have, pick one card, put it face down in front of you. Once every player has done that, you flip over the card simultaneously, leave it in front of you, and then you pass the remaining cards you have in your hand to the left. In the second round, you'll actually pass to your right. Third round, you go back to your left. Now, this game does something a little bit differently in that you'll start off with 6 cards in your hand, and you're only trying to get 5 cards out in front of you. So you'll have 1 card that's not going to be played at the end of the round. That card will just be tossed away into the pile and everything gets reshuffled and reset for the next round. The other thing it does differently is that before you pass your cards, after you choose one and flip over to the next player, you're actually going to keep one of the remaining cards you have in your hand and then add it to the next pile that you get from the player either on your right or left, depending on what round it is. That means you can keep a card over if you're trying to hold on to it. Maybe you didn't want to play it that particular round, but maybe you can play it the next round, or maybe you're just trying to keep that card out of the hands of other people. Now, what does all this drafting do? Well, what you're trying to do is have a clear... We're trying to do 2 different things in order to get these chips. You see that there are 5 chips that correspond to sushi, and there's 1 chip that is actually a dessert chip, dessert points. So you have 2 goals in this game. The first is to get a clear majority of the different types of sushi. So here's all the different cards that you have in the game. I think this, I'm going to really butcher these because I didn't memorize the different types of what these sushi are actually called. But I think this is a cucumber roll. And these numbers around the edges of the card are actually how many of these cards are in the deck. So that's an important little reminder. Banana something? I don't know, but there's 5 of them. And here is salmon somethings or others, I think. This is sad. But anyways, what I should mention is not only does this indicate how many cards are in the deck, but the more cards that there are in the deck for each particular type of sushi, the more likely that the chips corresponding to those for points are going to be worth more points. That's because it's harder to get a majority of sushi when there are more cards of that type in the deck because everyone's trying to draft all of those. Hence, the cucumber rolls, which are only 4, those are worth the least amount of points. Those chips are 1, 2, and 3 points, but there's only 4, so it can be very simple for someone to get a majority. As soon as someone gets 3 of them, well, no one could ever beat them. Then you have shrimp. I know that one. That's shrimp. This is, I don't know, caviar maybe? And then the final card in the deck is actually the triplet card. This card can count as any type of sushi that you want when you flip it over. You can't play it as the first card for the rounds, but when you do play it, you add it to one of the existing sushi piles that you've started. So whenever you play cards, you're actually going to stack them up in front of you. So if I did want to use that as another cucumber roll, I could just stack it on that one if it wasn't the first, as long as this isn't the first card that you play, it's got to go on something. Now, the reason why this says half around the edges of it, I'll get to that at the end when it goes to advanced scoring rules. And that's how the game is going to proceed. You're drafting cards, putting one down, flipping over, keeping one, passing it along until every player has 5 cards laid out in front of them. Then at the end of the round, you do the scoring. You're going to look at what every player has and determine who has a clear majority of each of the different types of sushi. If you have a clear majority, it's very simple. You're going to go ahead and you're going to take the chip that corresponds to the one you have a clear majority of. Remember that these are shuffled up and randomized, so you don't know what point chip that you're getting. And when you grab it, you can look at it, but then you'll keep it secret into yourself until the very end of the game when you'll reveal and count up your points. Now, if you do not have a clear majority, if you are tied with someone for one of the different types of sushi, then no one who is in that tie gets one of the point chips. Not at all. You have to have a clear majority. But if there is one player who is not in the tie, but has played at least one card of that type of sushi, like, for example, let's say, I keep using the cucumber roll because it's the only one that I know for sure that's the name of it. Let's say that this game goes up to 5 players. Let's say that there were 3 players who all had, well, that would be impossible. Okay, let's say that there were 3 players who had one of the cucumber rolls. None of those 3 players, no, that wouldn't work either. Let's go. Let's go with the salmon roll. I think that's what this is here. Let's say that there were 2 players who each had 2 of the salmon rolls. And they had the majority, but they were tied, so they get nothing. If one other player had 1 salmon roll, that player would get to take one of those chips. But you have to actually have played at least 1 card in order for you to be eligible for that. So in other words, if there's a tie, it goes down to the next person who would be winning. Now, that's all well and good, but I haven't explained the dessert points. That's because, thematically speaking, it's not enough for you to just eat a lot of your favorite kind of sushi. You should try multiple different kinds of sushi in order to be a well-rounded sushi individual, I guess. What that means in gameplay terms is that whoever has the most different kinds of sushi in front of you, regardless of how many of that type of sushi you have, that player is going to get to take one of the dessert chips. And these are worth 1, 2, and 3 points. And again, they're randomized, so you're not sure which one that you're going to get. And the tie rule applies here. If more than one player is tied for the amount of different types of sushi, none of them get it, and then it goes down to the next person who has played the most types of sushi. In that one, there will be, unless every single person is tied, which is possible, then someone's going to get that point. At least that's a little bit easier for someone to get than the other types of sushi. So you're going to keep going along, you're going to keep drafting cards, trying to vie for these different chips, making sure that you have a clear majority when possible. When, after the end of the 3rd round, you're going to flip over all the point chips that you've managed to accrue, add up your points, whoever has the most points is the winner. Now, I mentioned that there was a little bit of advanced scoring rules, and that comes into play in 2 different ways. And I don't recommend them, by the way, but in any case, for the triplet cards, you see that it says it's a 0.5 half point around here. This means that these cards only count as half a card when you're determining majority for different types of sushi, because as you can see, there's 3 different types of sushi on here, so it's not as good as 1 full plate of a different type of sushi. So it means that you're in okay shape as long as you play one. I mean, it's a good thing that you play that if you're trying to get a majority, but someone can still, like, if I had 1.5 salmon, someone else could tie me if they had 1.5. So it just makes the card worth a little bit less, and I don't really see the point in it. But the other type is, you'll notice, well, it can be kind of hard to see, but on some of these cards there's a little tiny wasabi mark. It almost looks like the numbers have a little green dunce cap on them. When you're vying for dessert points, if you have cards in any of the cards that you're using in order to make a set to vie for control of that, those cards only count as half. Same thing as the sushi. So if there's a wasabi on one of your sushi, it counts as half. It's not as good, and it's going to be harder for you to gain control of the dessert. Again, I don't recommend playing with either of those rules. The main game is fine as it is. That's Sushi Draft. I don't know what it is about using sushi as a theme, but I've now played 2 sushi-themed games, and both of them just look really cool. I love the artwork on Sushi Go, and in Sushi Draft, the artwork is nice, not as good as Sushi Go, but the circular cards, I thought they would be awkward and stupid to actually handle, but they actually work really well, and they look really good on the table, together with the scoring chips. So, I don't know, I think both games knock it out of the park as far as appearance, and the cards in this one are good quality as well. I don't know how I feel about the little circular thing, and Game Rights is going to probably have a rectangular tin, which might be better or worse, but you know, nevertheless, you know, pulling this out, people are like, what kind of game is that? I mean, it's definitely something that draws attention to itself. So I really just like the appearance and, you know, the character of this game. Now, as far as the gameplay, again, this is very similar to Sushi Go. And as far as it's very light card drafting. You're drafting these different cards, and you're trying to make different sets that are going to give you points. But like I said, the scoring is very different, because you're trying to have the most of different things, regardless of what type they are. You're just trying to have the most of different things in order to take those point chips. But you're competing with the other players in a much more straightforward way. Like in Sushi Go, someone could be working on something, like they're trying to get the most of the dumplings or whatever it might be. But this game is much more... So you could just let someone go with dumplings. You probably shouldn't, but you could just do that, because you might be focusing on something that's going to get you even more points. Like I think it's the sashimi that might get you 10 points if you get a set. So that might be more worthwhile for you to do. But in Sushi Draft, it is much more competitive, competing with the other players in order to get those different sets. It's much more of actively looking at other players in order to see whether you're tying with them, making sure that what you pass them isn't going to put them in a situation of tying with you or beating you. It's a little more forward thinking and trying to decide how you're going to plan things, because the other difference as far as the draft goes in this game is that you get to save one of your cards every time that you draft. You're drafting only 5 of the 6 cards that you have, but every time before you pass, you get to keep one, hold it back. So it's such a small thing, but it does add a lot to the game. It adds just a little more planning, and I like that. I'll say here, I don't know which of these games was designed and developed first, whether they were privy to each other. I'm thinking it's just a total coincidence. And so I'm trying to keep them both separate and look at them separately. And, you know, Sushi Draft, it might just be those 2 little changes, that you're vying for the most of things in order to get the point chips, as opposed to trying to make specific sets of sushi that each have their own power, so to speak. And being able to hold a card back, those seem like minor changes, but they do make the game pretty different, in my opinion. Now, a negative thing about Sushi Draft that's also very different is the fact that the point chips have the randomized point values on the back. It's such a weird thing, because in one sense I like it because it adds some variety and sort of, you know, risk to the game, because you can look at the point allotments and, you know, it's like, you know, you just don't know if you're going for a chip that's, you know, not a lot of points or not. So it adds some variability. You could see someone with a lot of chips and think that, oh, they're definitely going to win, but then you find out that your fewer chips had more points on them. In one sense, I like that, because it means that you're still in it and there's always a chance. In the other sense, it kind of ruins some of the strategy of the game, because it's so random and variable. It kind of means like, oh, you worked harder, you made better sets, you got more chips because of that, but you might still lose. So that's a weird thing, and I'm not totally comfortable with that. I would like to maybe try the game again and see if you just score points and then take the chip. You make sets, and instead of don't even acknowledge the points on the other side, just take a chip, and whoever has the most chips might be the winner. Or maybe just set a specific point value for each type of chips based on the number of cards in each one. And that's another interesting thing too, is that you know, because the numbers are on the cards, exactly how many cards are in the deck. So you know what you should be going for. You can kind of look at the odds and see how things are going to go, whereas in Sushi Go, it's a little tougher because there's more cards in the deck and there's more different types. So it's harder to sort of do a lot of planning with that information of knowing how many cards of each type of sushi there are. Now there's a little variant here, they call it the advanced scoring rules, where you can, the triples, the ones that you can, the triple sushi, which you can have count as any type of sushi you want for a set, they only count as half a point. And also if some of the point chips have wasabi on it, they only count for half a point chip, something like that. But to be honest, I haven't even bothered with it because I don't think that adds a lot to the game. I don't think that, I think it's just a little extra bit of fiddliness that doesn't need to be there. I think you can have enough fun with this game just doing the normal scoring. So having said all of that, do you have room in your collection for 2 sushi-themed games? I do, but then again, I like these quirky drafting games. I like having a lot of different fillers to, because we always play at least 1 or 2 fillers every week, I like having a variety, and I think these are different enough because of that scoring system and because of their appearance that it's worth having them. And in fact, we played both games back to back and they felt like different games. It was a different experience for me. Neither of them are very deep, neither of them are very strategic, but I still think they're very fun, very fast, and very charming. I mean, that's probably the #1 word I think about when I think of either of these 2 sushi games. So that's Sushi Draft. Now, if you want the game, I don't know how difficult it is to track down this original Japanese version. I just happen to know, have a connection on Board Game Geek for someone in Japan. And they do have the English rules available on Board Game Geek or somewhere. I think they're on Board Game Geek if you do get a hold of the Japanese version. And the rules are very simple anyways. But if you want to wait, it will be out from Gamewright later in the year. And I'll probably pick that one up as well to see what differences there are. Maybe they'll add some extra little scoring rules or new types of sushi as well. But for right now, either way, I recommend the game. My name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl. And I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day and every way. Take care.